Hello and welcome. My name is George Pickering and I'm a member of IATEFL, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. And it's my very great pleasure to deliver this talk today on how to organise effective conferences. Before I begin the talk, I'd just like to say a big thank you to the British Council Senegal for organising these talks and for making them possible. I'd also like to thank them for their ongoing commitment to the development of teacher associations in the region. Different teacher associations in the region are at different stages of their development, and these talks have been especially designed to help them take the next step in their development. One of the things that all teacher associations seem to have in common are conferences. And I want to take this opportunity of sharing with you some of the best practices that I know about delivering effective conferences. For some TAs, this will just sound like common sense. But I hope that for some TAs, there will be some new ideas in this talk that they can implement in their first and future conferences. Now, as a kind of warmer activity, I'd like you to spend a couple of moments thinking about what are the ingredients of a great conference. Perhaps you've been to several conferences yourself. What for you are the things that make a conference stand out? What are the things that make an outstanding conference? What's on your list? Did you think of great speakers? Did you think of a theme that was relevant to teachers? Was it that the conference had practical workshops? Was it that the venue was excellent? Was it the food? For some people, the food at conference is very important. Or was it the opportunity to meet other teachers? Was it the opportunity to renew friendships with people you've met at previous conferences? Was it the opportunity to meet new people? Were these things on your list? Was it about social support? Was it about providing teachers with an opportunity to share their problems and possibly their solutions with other teachers? Did this appear on your list? Proper planning. Would you say that that's important? Is that an ingredient? Well, I would say perhaps it's not an ingredient, but it's perhaps the recipe that puts all the ingredients together. And proper planning also, I would suggest, involves the chef, the conference committee. And in the next 20 minutes or so, we are going to look at some of the ways that you can ensure that your conference is organised effectively. And you have the chance to review the way that you currently plan and organise your conference. I think a starting point for any conference planning is to think about why we are holding a conference. In other words, what are the aims of your conference? Firstly, of course, there are the educational aims. People talk about knowledge, training and developmental opportunities for teachers and for other educators. But of course, there are other aims as well. There is a social aim, the bringing together of teachers from perhaps different backgrounds, from different contexts. There's also the informational aim of allowing people to know more about your association and what you do and what you can offer teachers. There's also the promotional aspect. This is your chance to show people what you can provide to teachers. And of course, finally, there is the financial aspect to conferences, because for many teacher associations, their conference is their opportunity to generate a surplus that they can use to put on other events and to put on other activities for teachers. So what do you need to do before, during, and after a conference to ensure that it is effectively organised, to ensure that it reaches as many teachers as possible, to ensure that it's as meaningful and memorable as it can be? Let's look at those three stages, one after the other. So, first point is plan your next conference as early in advance as possible. Running your own conference is a very, very stressful event. There is a great danger at the end of a conference to breathe a sigh of relief and think, oh, thank God that's over for another year. Now we don't have to worry about the annual conference for another 11 months. But there is a danger, because the longer you leave it until you start planning it, the more the danger is that you will leave things till the last minute and you won't do the necessary amount of effective planning. First thing to think about as soon as possible is what's the date, what's the venue, and what's the theme. Next, we need a conference budget. So early as possible, think about what's the budget for the conference. And when you're planning a conference, one of the things that I've found helpful, and many other people have found helpful, is to have a checklist. Have a checklist of all the different things that need to be done, so you can make it clear who does what and by when. And the last point to make, a fairly obvious point, but an important point, that when you're planning a conference, it has to be a team approach. Conferences are too complex to be left to one or two individuals. The bigger the conference team, to a certain extent, the better. So there are some of the things that you should start planning as early in advance as possible. The second question that I'd like you to think about is, why don't you review the conference format? In other words, it's very easy to do next year what we did this year. But here are some questions to stimulate some thinking about what kind of activities, what kind of learning opportunities can you give people at your conference? What about plenaries? Do you have plenaries which are theoretical? Do you have plenaries which always have practical implications for the teacher in the classroom? Next, do you have enough workshops? In other words, do you have enough opportunities for teachers to learn practical teaching tips and techniques? Swap shops. Do you have any sessions where teachers get the opportunity to exchange ideas with each other? Do you have panel discussions? Do you now have any kind of blogs, online speakers coming into the conference? Do you use Facebook to create a buzz around your conference? Do you have any social activities? Do you look after the social needs of teachers? Is there in fact something in your conference for everyone? And of course, have you ever thought of changing the dynamic of your conference? Perhaps doing something like Spelt do in Pakistan. They have a traveling conference that goes around regions to different cities. So before you set in stone the format for your conference, think a moment about what are we doing, what could we do differently in the future. My third point is to promote the conference. Yes, you may have a website which announces your conference and details. Yes, you may use adverts in newspapers. But these days, people find other media as equally as important. For example, texting. I know a teacher association in Southern Africa who didn't get their advert in the local paper in time to broadcast information about their conference, and so they asked all their members to text their friends. The result of this was they got 50 more people at their conference than they've ever had at a conference before. Facebook, using your Facebook site, possibly having blogs with speakers in advance of your conference. And of course, you can't beat visits to institutions and sponsors in order to inform people about your conference. So to think early on about how do we promote our conference using the channels we already use, and how can we use other channels in the future. Then of course you need to write a conference program. Every conference of course has its conference program. And I think the best advice I can give you here is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Many conference programs are over elaborate and the essential detail is lost from the point of view of someone looking through it to know where their next session is coming. So I think it's always good to have a page in your conference program with all the talks on it, so people can look at that page and see simply what their options are and where all the talks are going to take place. The next point is to obtain conference sponsorship. And once again, any planning that you do in advance will help you in this endeavour. So decide what kind of sponsorship you want. Is it money, goods and services, volunteers, participants? Having decided what kind of sponsorship you want, you provide a simple list of sponsorship opportunities for potential sponsors. So you make it clear to them what it is possible for them to sponsor. Then I would suggest it's useful to make a list of potential sponsors. And sometimes it's good to look beyond the normal suspects of people who sponsor your events, to think about other people who could possibly sponsor your conference. And then, and this is, I think, very useful advice, contact potential sponsors early. All of your sponsors have their own budgetary cycles, so make sure you are contacting them about your sponsorship needs when they are in a position to provide you with the funds that you want. My sixth point, and this still, remember, this is before the conference, is to make registration as simple as possible. If it's possible, of course, online registration would be very helpful. The other point is only collect the information you need. Don't make the form more complicated than it needs to be. Is there any point in finding out the age of the person attending your conference? The answer is probably no, unless you want a breakdown of your membership and people attending the conference. When we come to at the conference registration, I think you need to plan in ahead to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. So in other words, have greeters, have spare pairs of hands who are around to greet people, and make sure you have separate queues for paid and unpaid delegates. So there are 6 ideas for how you can plan your conference effectively in advance. Now let's move on to 6 things that we can do during the conference to make our conference as effectively as possible. The first thing I would say is a fairly obvious point. It's to welcome all participants. When people arrive at your conference, they may be feeling nervous, they may be feeling lonely, it may be their first conference. There is a danger, if we're not careful, that people feel processed rather than welcomed. So have greeters whose sole responsibility is to help people find their way around the conference. Welcome people at the point of registration. Ask participants on the conference feedback form if they felt welcome at the beginning of the conference. The second thing we can do during the conference is to open on a high note. That is to say, make the opening ceremony as memorable as possible. People tend to remember the beginning and the end of events. So start your conference with the best possible memorable opening ceremony. For example, whilst people are sitting waiting for things to start, you could show a video or a slideshow of your TA, of your teacher association. You can take the opportunity to thank and involve everyone for coming to the conference, particularly first-time conference goers. In other words, even though your opening ceremony might need to have a certain amount of formality about it, take the opportunity to involve the audience by asking them questions. How many people are already members of the association? How many people are not members of the association yet? How many people have been to previous conferences? And how many people are at their first conferences? It's also a good idea to have a short activity where delegates talk with each other. If you're not careful, people sit in opening ceremonies for a long time listening to other people talk. It's a great way of releasing the energy in the room, people's pent-up activity, to give them a simple short activity to do early on in the conference so they hear their own voice. So remember Maslow's pyramid, which essentially tells us that people need their physiological needs to be satisfied before they can self-actualize and go about the business of improving their teaching. So what does this mean? It means people are often sitting there wanting to know when is the first break and when are they first going to get fed and watered. Remember the old saying, the mind can only absorb as much as the bottom can endure. So the third point during the conference is to ensure that you have the right balance of educational activities. So in other words, you've chosen your plenary speakers not just because of their knowledge, but also because they have something with practical implications for teachers. Secondly, it's important that you have practical teaching workshops. And it's also useful for people running conferences to give speakers advice regarding how to make their presentations and their workshops as impactful as possible. Next, to have also in the mix panel discussions and debates. And it's also absolutely vital that teachers have formal and informal opportunities to share problems and teaching ideas with each other. And also, of course, remember that you don't have to rely upon speaker proposals coming in. You can decide to have your own set of workshops or seminars that you insert into the program. For example, IATEFL has a how-to track, and one of the sessions on the how-to track is how to make a presentation at a conference. This is a useful way of helping people to think about how they could give a talk at a conference in future years. The fourth point, which follows on from the earlier reference to Maslow, is to pay attention to the physical and social needs of teachers. This involves ensuring that sessions start and finish on time. Make sure there are proper breaks. It's very easy for there to be some slippage during seminars and for the breaks to get shortened. Breaks are absolutely essential. And some people would say this is where the real learning takes place. So make sure that your sessions start and finish on time, which means that people have their proper breaks. Put on social events throughout the conference and provide mingling activities, opportunities for teachers to move around and to meet people at the conference that they didn't know before they arrived. And also identify clearly for conference goers, helpers, conference monitors. In other words, have people with t-shirts, have help points, so people know who to go to and where to go to if they have any questions about the conference. Fifth point is make delegates aware of any conference changes. It's inevitable that people drop out. It's inevitable that you need to make last-minute changes to the program. The important thing is that you flag these up as clearly as possible to conference goers. Announce changes at the beginning of each day, and as well as that, put any changes on a conference board. Also, you can think about putting the sessions in each room on the door of the room each day. These are ways of ensuring that people know about the conference changes and avoiding the disappointment of going to a room to discover that the talk you wanted to see has been cancelled. The sixth point that one can do during a conference is to end on a high note. How do you end on a high note? Well, obviously you thank everyone, you thank the speakers, you thank the sponsors, you thank the organising committee, and you also thank the conference goers. You hold some high energy activity, for example, a raffle, and if it's culturally appropriate, you can sing a song, you can have dancing, you can do whatever you think is appropriate. You can also do a what have you learnt activity. You can also invite people to think about at the end of the conference, what are they taking away with them? What are they going to change in their daily practice? And you can also end the conference with a picture slideshow of the conference. So, having managed the conference, what do you do next? Well, for many people, the answer is go away to a dark room and cut yourself off from civilization for several days to recover. But at some future point, you need to review the conference so that you can learn the lessons from it. Firstly, of course, and this is best done towards the end of the conference, obtain written feedback from participants. This can be a simple feedback form, and one of the ways of encouraging people to fill in the form is to say that all feedback forms, the names of people filling them in, will be entered in a prize draw, and the winner will receive something of great value, for example, a free conference for next year. As well as feedback, you can do a general review of the conference as a committee. So in other words, to sit down and to think about what went well, what didn't go so well, what will we do again next time, and what will we change. Then I think it's important to write and thank all stakeholders, because a written word is very important for people who have given you of their time or also of their money. And if you have sponsors for your conference, I think it's important to demonstrate to them the benefits of their support, because many of them will not have been people who attended the conference. So maybe a photo of where their banner was placed, or possibly a copy of the conference program with their advert in it. And of course, it's also important to leverage the value of your conference by disseminating the conference to non-attendees. In other words, think of the ways that you can spread the learning from the conference through the newsletter, through videos, through Facebook, and also through blogs. And finally, point 6, celebrate your success. You and your colleagues have done something fantastic. You have organised a conference which potentially can transform the lives of teachers. Before you start thinking about the next conference, take a moment to congratulate yourselves on what you have achieved. So, what could you do differently? Having listened to these ideas about what you can do before, during, and after the conference to make it effective, what are things that you could try doing before? What are things that you could try doing during? And what are things that you could try doing after the conference? What are some of the changes that you might want to try? And see if it could help to make your conference even more effective in the future. For further reading, you might want to try looking at the Running an Association for Language Teachers handbook, edited by Susanna Gomez and published by IATEFL and the British Council. And if you can't get hold of a physical copy, you can download a copy from the British Council's Teaching English website. So, at the end of this seminar, I'd just like to say thank you for staying until the end. And I'm just wondering, after everything we've said, if there are any action points that you might want to carry out in the future. I want to leave you with a final quotation. This comes from Albert Schweitzer, who said, "In everyone's life at some time our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flame by an encounter with another human being. We should all be thankful for those people who rekindle the inner spirit." If we run effective conferences, we have an opportunity to collectively to rekindle the inner fire of teachers. Thank you once again for attending this seminar.